about mothers and daughters. And I had just before that, I was working in development. I was a fundraiser, and I was working for UMass Medical School at the time. And I was in Florida courting our snowbirds, all the wealthy donors who would go down to Florida in the wintertime. And the chair of our board was hosting a dinner at her home in Palm Beach. And I happened to be sitting next to the chancellor of the medical school and his wife. And they were telling me, and I knew that they had adopted children. They had 8 adopted children. And 3 of those children were Vietnamese. And they were children who had been adopted during the baby lift. And how many of you know what the baby lift is? Okay? So as Saigon was falling, right, there were in orphanages in Vietnam, the children who were the children of Vietnamese women and American soldiers who had been rejected by the Vietnamese families, right? And there was this concerted effort, as it was becoming clear that the war was going badly, to get those children out of Vietnam, and to this massive effort to have them adopted. And they were airlifted on those big cargo planes that you see sometimes, doing maneuvers up here. What Aaron, the chancellor, had told me is that one of his Vietnamese sons had actually found his birth mother. I had a catering company. I lived in the north end of Boston, which is the Italian section of the city, which was an experience in itself. It was like living in my grandmother's neighborhood. Everybody knew everybody else and everybody's business, but it was also, I was a single mom with a 1-year-old living in a 3rd floor walk-up. And on Saturdays, I would get, and my son was a very big baby, I would get the umbrella stroller and I'd walk all the way down the stairs to go do my shopping. And one morning I got down and I realized that my wallet was still on the kitchen table. And I thought, oh my God, I have to carry this kid all the way back up the 3 stairs. And I thought, no. I put him in the stroller and I wheeled him across the street to the butcher. And I parked him on the sawdust and I said, Tony, can you watch the kids? Like, go get my wallet and I'll be back to buy my pork chops. And that's what I could do. And my babysitter lived across the street and everybody knew who I was. So anyway, I had this catering company for a while, and I'd always had a dream of having a restaurant. That never materialized, but I thought, you know what? I could have my restaurant in my novel. Mm-hmm. And so this is a story of 3 generations of women, starting in World War II, and the original woman, whose name is Rose, starts a restaurant because her husband comes back from World War II, who's been injured and can't work in construction anymore, and she's this feisty, street smart girl who's got to figure out how they're gonna live, and she figures out, well, he can't build, but he can probably cook, and so they start a restaurant. Months later, we had decided, instead of going back to the States for our home leave for Christmas, we were going to spend Christmas in Bavaria at my mother-in-law's house. And she sent me to the attic to get the Christmas decorations. And up in the attic, I found the box with the directions, but I also noticed leaning against the wall was a painting, a framed painting, but facing the wall. Like, you couldn't see, it was just the back of the painting. So of course I peeked. And it was this beautiful life-size nude of a young woman stretched out on a bed with her hands like this above her head. So I came downstairs with the box and I said, Mom, that painting in the attic. And she said, oh, that's Tanta Maya. Her husband had painted it when she was like 30 years old. And I said, well, why is it in the attic? And she said, well, I don't want to hang it. And I said, well, could we have it? Yeah. And she said, of course. So we brought it back. When we moved back, it's hanging over our bed in our bedroom. And it was this inspiration to me, right, of this beautiful young woman who then became this vivacious 90-year-old. But the other thing I had learned about Tanta Maya was that when she had, in her youth, had run a salon in Berlin to entertain nobility and wealthy people, to encourage them to commission her husband to paint for them. And she was very successful. A couple of years ago, when I was ready, I'd finished the series and I'd finished the Leonardo da Vinci novella. I thought, yeah, you know what? I think I now have the time to write the Tanta Maya story. But I also thought, because of the research that I'd started to do about artists, that rather than setting it in Berlin and having her half German, half Greek, I wanted her to be half Austrian, half Greek. Because in Vienna in the early 1900s, this was an incredibly rich time culturally. It was the time of Gustav Klimt and Egon Schiele. It was the time of Freud. It was the time of Gustav Mahler. All of the arts and the sciences were like integrated in this incredible like sort of soup of creativity. An incredible number of women at this time period who were producing art. There were restrictions. She could not study at the Vienna Academy of Art, of Fine Art, that women were not allowed. Women were not allowed to exhibit at the Secession building. The Secession was an organization created by Gustav Klimt to break away from the traditional academy and the traditional art. Women were forbidden from exhibiting there. But there was a gallery in Vienna called Salon Pisco, which mounted several exhibitions of women artists. And I found, again, thank goodness for museums, and when they do retrospectives, the Belvedere Museum in Vienna a few years ago did an exhibition called City of Women. And it was all about the Viennese women artists of that particular time period that I was writing about. 2 pages, right? This is part 1. It's Vienna, 1902. The first time Andreas Brenner painted me, I was 15. I sat in stillness, speaking not a word, and keeping my hands folded carefully like the schoolgirl I still was, and I watched him. His brushstrokes on the canvas were like a caress. His eyes, studying my own, seemed to be searching for something more than shape or color or the length of my very dark lashes. Later, much later, he told me that it was my soul he was seeking. The genius in capturing a likeness that causes onlookers to say, but that is exactly how she looks, is not in the angle of the cheekbone or the curve of the lower lip. The true great portraitist knows that he must plunge below the surface of the flesh and paint from within. But I knew none of that then. As I said, I was a schoolgirl, my parents' only child, and subject to their wishes. My father, the Greek merchant Kostas Sirkos, was intent on making his mark on the Viennese society into which he had married. On the walls of the elegant homes he had supplied with priceless antiquities, Persian carpets, and Indian chests carved with peacocks and amaranth, my father had noted the portraits, thin-lipped ancestors in powdered wigs, innocent children in impossible outfits frolicking with small dogs, and plump, satisfied wives displaying a ruby brooch or sapphire earrings. A portrait, my father decided, was one of those possessions that signaled status. He commissioned Andreas Brenner on the advice of the opera singer Magdalena Victor, a recent client. She had been ecstatic with the results of young Brenner's work. Although still in his 20s, Brenner had the sight and the hand of a much more experienced artist, she told my father. Had my father listened carefully to the nuances of Madame Victor's praise, he might have recognized the danger of inviting the young artist to paint me. Until the moment Andreas Brenner walked into our home, carrying his easel, a stretched and gessoed canvas, and a battered wooden box of oils, I had been a naive, unaware, and untouched. I had not known hunger of any kind. I did not know what it meant to be consumed by need.
The meaning of a Celtic knot. The Trinity knot, or triquetra, has no beginning or end and showcases its power and the connectedness of all things. The triquetra is Latin in origin, meaning three-cornered. Its endlessness represents eternity. The basic shape represents the life cycle, birth, death, and rebirth. The three corners represent the Trinity, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Each loop represents the past, the present, and the future of one's lineage. The inner circle represents infinite connections and is said to bind the three parts, body, mind, and spirit, together to form the soul.